In today's episode, a man enjoying his time drinking on the beach ventures to the shore with his friend to relieve himself. Standing in the waist-high ocean water, a bull shark launches itself out of the water and clamps down onto his leg. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying bull shark attack on Marcelo Rocha, fatally mauled while peeing in the ocean. Welcome to Final Affliction. Marcelo Rocha Santos and the beachgoers at Piedade Beach were having the time of their lives. The dry July of 2021 was a blistering one in Brazil, even warmer than the usual mild weather that came with the off-season. The sands were speckled with locals hoping to cool off in the water, and without the inconvenience of the usual hordes of tourists to pack up the beach, the afternoon was turning out to be a very enjoyable one. Children were playing, girls were showing off their bikini bodies, and old friends were catching up. This is a high alert season for beachgoers since it's the bull shark's nesting time. Brazilians are no strangers to shark attacks on their shores. The beaches are littered with warning signs, and almost no one ventures past the first few waves. Children are kept in the rock pools, and the few brave souls who do dare to swim farther are quickly brought back by the lifeguards that are spaced out every few meters. And if the lifeguards were to miss a naughty teenager trying to show off, the more responsible sunbathers and spectators are quick to jump in to keep a situation from becoming a deadly one. Marcelo was there with a dozen of his friends. They'd bought coolers packed to the brim with cold beer and ciders, and the street vendors supplied more than enough delicious food to keep the party going on for the whole day. They'd started off their day on the sand at around 9 that morning, and by the time noon had come and gone, everyone was in high spirits, and the trash bag beside the cool box had more empty bottles in it than the cooler had cold ones left. The water emptied at noon. The sun was just too hot for most to bear, and swimming in the high sun was just asking for a sunburn. The young families with children went home, their overtired toddlers crying in protest, leaving the beach to the partygoers who were starting to get rowdy. The water cleared just in time because a 7-foot bull shark had just begun to circle the water. The mating season went by some months ago, and she'd already given birth to her young. The aquatic beast was desperately hungry. When she smelled the warm bodies in the water, she was miles away, and it took her all morning to reach the beach that smelled so tantalizing. The swimming children were blissfully unaware of the animal that was inching closer to them. At one point, her fins sliced through the water's surface, but no one even noticed, and twice she locked in on a target that swam out far enough from the shallows, only to have the human retreat back to the shore before she could strike. She was getting impatient. When the water cleared in the midday glare, only a handful of individuals stepped into the water, and then it was only to their waists. They left behind a rank ammonia smell before retreating back to the sand. The animal did not know it, but people were walking into the water to relieve themselves. The beach had no bathroom, and when nature called, the partygoers would step into the water just deep enough to look like they were cooling off and release the contents of their bladders discreetly. But the shark did know that she wasn't going to get lucky with a brave individual that broke off from the pack to swim in deeper waters anymore. If she was going to eat at all today, she'd have to get closer, right in the shallows, where she wouldn't have as much of an advantage as she'd have in the deep. So she crept in, her gray body stalking silently through the water, circling and waiting for another to come in. All the while, the party continued to pick up steam outside in the sun. Marcelo's group of 12 had grown to nearly 20 as acquaintances happened to come by, and old friends ran into each other. Marcelo and his friend Ademir were off to the side, having a heated but friendly argument about football. Both men were in their 50s, and they naturally sought out each other's company, away from the younger crowd who were talking about trendy topics that didn't interest them all that much. After many beers and laughter, Marcelo was starting to get uncomfortable. Without even suggesting it, both men got up from the ground and walked over to the waves. Ademir had just as much to drink as Marcelo, and he needed to pee just as badly. So together, they waded into the water. without breaking their conversation. Up high, from his post, the lifeguard on duty noticed the men walking into the shallows, but he knew exactly what they were doing, so he didn't think it was necessary to warn them to stay out of the deep. And sure enough, Ademir and Marcelo only went in until they were waist deep. The lifeguard relaxed and resumed scanning the rest of the beach for more pressing cases than two men relieving themselves. No one could have known what danger Ademir and Marcelo were in. If it were any other season, people might have noticed the approaching shadow just beneath the surface, but the murky water hid the predator completely, and she became instantly aware of the two men who stepped into her domain. Their warmth and their movements reached her senses long before the ammonia that they were leaving behind did. Still in the middle of their discussion on the tactical mistakes and the biased referee of the football game a few days ago, Marcelo and Ademir stood talking and peeing out in the surf. Ademir's hands were talking with his mouth, gesturing wildly in the air, and Marcelo was laughing heartily with him when the beast struck, pummeling at them like a bullet. She closed her jaws on the nearest piece of flesh she could reach, Marcelo's thigh. Her trajectory blasted Ademir aside, sending him crashing into the water. Marcelo was thrown backward, his head going under as the beast rammed into him. The animal had misjudged the size and weight of the fully grown man, and even though she'd taken a sizable chunk out of his leg, she didn't get a firm enough grip on him to drag him deeper in. The men spluttered and gagged on salt water, struggling to regain their footing. Ademir got up to race to the beach, but Marcelo's leg gave out under him. He hadn't even realized that he'd been bitten until he went down a second time. That's when the bright red water and the shooting pain in his thigh finally registered to him. Ademir grabbed his friend's outstretched hand to pull him out, but Marcelo was suddenly ripped from his grasp. The animal was back. She'd taken a hairpin loop and attacked again, this time grabbing hold of the injured man's right hand and ripping it clean off with her razor-sharp teeth. Ademir dove in after Marcelo, this time getting his left arm in his grasp. Ademir didn't take time to look for the beast, nor did he even bother to lift Marcelo's head out of the water. He just started wading to shore, dragging his friend along as fast as he could. The water around them was now a deep crimson red. Marcelo wasn't just bleeding from his right stump. The shark had severed the femoral artery in his leg, too. He was pumping out his life's blood from two major arteries, and in the seconds between the attack and Ademir dragging him out onto the sand, Marcelo had already lost consciousness. The entire event happened so suddenly that the partygoers hadn't even realized that anything was wrong until Ademir dragged the bleeding man onto the sand. Dropping everything in hand, they rushed forward to get Marcelo further out of the water, but he was dead before the ambulance even hit the road to get to him. Bleeding from both major veins took less than 3 minutes to kill him. It wasn't until the next tourist season that anyone stepped into the water around Piedad Beach again, and then it was only tourists that went in. The locals stayed clear for almost a year. An attack in waters so shallow was just too close to home for mothers to allow their babies to go anywhere near the beach. And for the rest, well, a few beers in the sun could be had around the barbecue, just as enjoyably as it would have been on the shore. Besides, the memories of one of their own lost to those waters was just too fresh to even think of going back. They all feared that they too would meet their terrifying final affliction.